You can absolutely conquer whatever it is you choose to confront. In this show, we talk PTG, we listen and believe, we support and empower.
Hey, that's what I always dreamed of, but I was nervous sometimes.
Yeah.
Each time I moved a little closer and a little closer
Yeah.
and a little closer,
Yeah.
and some told me, just take a leap of faith.
There you
Go
go.
ahead, let's jump.
Ready? Let's go. Leap of faith. There you go. Whoa.
Whether you have experienced domestic violence personally or not, someone you know has. Your circle of family, friends, acquaintances, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience domestic violence at some point in their life. Physical abuse is only one of the many forms of domestic violence. Survivors also report experience of verbal, emotional, spiritual, sexual, financial, electronic, and so much more. Domestic violence does not discriminate. It can leave you traumatized and devastated, mentally, emotionally, financially. You can find yourself homeless, jobless, helpless. The list can go on. There's blankets of insecurities, triggers, doubts, and other residual effects that become hurdles that impact our life as we do our best to move on. Many people associate butterflies with a sense of freedom. We've been taught along the way to focus on the transformation that takes place inside of the cocoon. I invite you to take a moment to conceptualize all the odds the caterpillar was up against and needed to defeat in order to get to a safe place, to build its cocoon and actually experience the transformation. My name is A. Garcia. I am a mother and survivor of a double attempted homicide. Now, I'm dedicating my life to take yours to the next level by experiencing post-traumatic growth to begin a new chapter in your life. Let's get started on this journey together. A. Garcia here. Welcome to Confronting Domestic Violence, where you cannot conquer what you choose not to confront. Today, I have Maria Elena here to share her story, her experience, and her journey through domestic violence. And remember, we are not here to ignite any triggers. We apologize in advance if that happens. Please do what's best for you, and we will pick it up from where we left off. Maria, thank you. Welcome to Confronting Domestic Violence. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Yes, definitely a topic I'm very passionate about. So I'm excited about this interview.
Yes, and we were just having short conversation, like a meet and greet, and then we were like, oh my gosh, we're talking about so much content, we just need to jump in right now.
Yeah.
So this is off the cuff, like raw in real time,
We're not scripted. We're just gonna go with it.
Yeah, we met 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So Maria, if you want to just open up with who you are, what you're about, and why you're here, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, so my name is Maria Elena Iturralde Sepulveda. Typical Latino last name. Sepulveda is the married attachment. So I am actually a product of domestic violence. My father is a 3-time murderer, with one of those murders being my mother. And that's where the domestic violence part comes in. As you well know, children who are exposed to domestic violence also suffer the same traumas as the people going through it. And maybe even carry more of a guilt or shame, because sometimes as children, we may carry the load and feel like, oh, you know what, I could have done something about it, or was it because of me, or what have you. So there's a lot of things that go with that, and that's probably a whole nother topic. But what we were talking about earlier, if you want to continue from that, or maybe go back a little, and let's pick up what we were talking about as far as the resources available, right, to women and men who are experiencing domestic violence. What is available, what's not available. We were talking that one of the, and sorry, because we're just rolling with it. I was a board of directors for a nonprofit that worked with women and men who were experiencing domestic violence. One of the cool things was that the founder of the foundation was actually, I guess he was a prior abuser. And so he turned it around and decided that he was going to help women that were experiencing domestic violence. And so he would go and rescue the women from their homes and take them to a safe location, if you will. And that was interesting because I was one of the persons that received those calls in the middle of the night or what have you. And it was interesting that some women, even though they were experiencing this, we're not ready to leave yet. And a lot of people don't understand not being ready to. And there's just shame and guilt and all these things that are attached to that. And one of the things we were talking about is the lack of resources, especially for women who have children who are older, 10 and older, where shelters won't take them, especially if they're male children. So we were discussing that there's a need for more resources where women can come with their older children, because otherwise they're just stuck in that situation. Because even if there's shelters and availability, the age limit is stopping them from getting the help that they need to get. And you were speaking on that too.
I was, yes, because my personal situation, I was pregnant and I feared going to a shelter 8 months pregnant and with an 8-year-old child. It was very scary. And in the middle of the night, when something happens and the person is arrested and taken away by officers, there's really no available real-time resources for the recipient of the abuse. We were talking earlier about the sensitivity around the word victim, and we all have our personal definition and outlook behind that word. And for me personally, it took me a while to realize that I was a victim when I got to the mental space understanding that I was victimized. When you realize that you were victimized, then you're like, okay, yeah, it's a transition. So I'm not a victim because we're prideful and we don't want to be recognized as that. We don't even want to believe that. But really the definition is that you had no control. You were like just an innocent being, and not all the time that we're innocent. We couldn't control the other person and we were taken advantage of, and that is how we became the victim. So once you get to that place where you realize you were victimized, that is that transition that I was referring to, where you're getting out of that emotion space and getting into the head space. And it is a shift that helps you see things a little bit differently. And then once you realize that you were victimized and you're no longer going to accept it or put your energy towards it or relive that, then you become that survivor, right?
Right.
So emotional, could be financial, economical, all kinds of things. But going back to victim and shelters, again, for me, it was the middle of the night. There was no 1-800 number that was picking up the phone that was going to say, okay, yes, you can come right here. It's safe for you and your child. First of all, there's a vetting process, and then I have to have all the paperwork. And then by the time you get all that, it could be days later. Meanwhile, the offender has a roof over their head. They have meals delivered to them. They have running water available. And the victim not knowing where to go or when the offender is going to get out of being held, so they don't want to be home, but they have no safe place to go. Shelter is a huge issue. Shelter is a huge gap that I was faced with personally. And now hearing that if your child is over 10 and they don't have space or they deny you, and especially if it's a boy, that's really disheartening, because that's identifying a larger gap. And where are the solutions?
And some can go up like 12 could be the cutoff, but definitely there's a cutoff for many shelters. It's funny that you touch on the predator or abuser. It's interesting because, and we were talking about men as well, and the stigma behind men being abused as well. And I guess we can touch back on that, but because you touch on the predator or the abuser, whatever name you want to give the gentleman that is causing the harm, One of the interesting thing was for me is that we remove women from these environments, but we don't ever address the male or the woman that is causing the harm. And there's a saying, right? Hurt people hurt other people. What was interesting to me, and a lot of people, I've gone through a whole lot of healing. I now coach women who are wanting to heal their shame and what have you, but it was a long road for me to get to where I'm at now. And forgiven, of course. I always take my dad into consideration. I remember that he tried to get help. Now remember, this is long back. This is in the 80s and 90s. And he actually tried to get help. There was no help available for him. This is sometimes everyone has a story, and predators or abusers, they weren't born that way. This is something that was learned or something they felt they needed to do to control, whatever. And I feel that there needs to be more awareness or more resources for them as well. Because if we continue to just remove the women from and men from these environments, the cycle still continues because these men go on to abuse them, the next person, men and women go on to abuse the next person. There needs to be more of a focus on healing the predators as well, so that the cycle can really stop. Because if we're just removing the women, okay, these women get help, hopefully, right? Heal emotionally and move on to healthier relationships. But then you still have this other hurt individual who is continuing to hurt other people because they haven't resolved whatever emotional issues they have. And so then that's why the abuse continues, because we're only addressing one side. We're only treating, for the most part, we're only treating the victim, if you will, but not the predator. When there's two, and I know some people can look at that differently, but having had a father like that and lived in that situation as a child, and actually I can tell you, my dad actually went to get help, and the type of help he had it was a place where they beat him, so that the wife, so that you could identify with your wife's pain. Yes, it was strange. So they beat him up so that, and that was the only help available, is what I'm saying, in the 80s, because this is when he went to go try and get help. And so obviously he came back for maybe a week because it wasn't addressing his real issues, if you will, but I guess empathized for a week or two and said it was better for a week or two, but obviously that's not how you address his real issues of why he was an abuser. So I don't know what you or your audience may think about that. What do you guys think? Like, we should be addressing both sides, not just one side. Both sides, so that the abuse can actually stop.
Yes, I have a lot of feedback for that one there. I 100% agree with that. Absolutely. Because it's twofold, right? If the offender is taken to jail and they go through the system, there are mandated classes that they take to help prevent the cycle per se, right? They need to go to anger management. They need to work through some of their mental and emotional truths and identify what's some of the root causes. And then the help is there, whether it's medication or counseling or therapy or whatever. So sometimes if the individual actually has a conscience and is remorseful and they actually want the help, they'll receive it. Okay. Now, if the other side doesn't really care for receiving help and doesn't think that anything's wrong with them and that this is okay, they just show up. They just show up and go through the motions so they can go ahead and get their freedom back to go and repeat the pattern or get back into society and do whatever they do. Right. So I think that it really goes back to the individual. What is it that they truly want? And then on the flip side, for the recipient of the abuse, I'm being careful with the word victim, but the victim and or the recipient of the abuse, their immediate concerns are survival mode. They're not thinking about getting help mentally and emotionally. They're about safety and protection. For me, it was safety and privacy. Like I needed to protect my kids and provide for my kids and not be seen or heard by anybody because I needed to stay out of the spotlight. There was nobody's business where I was at. I needed to protect my children. And what I think that my personal opinion as it relates to seeking the actual help to recover after you move out and get into
Of course, safety
space.
always first.
Yeah, then it's that moving on point, and that moving on, it's hard to, once the dust settles and you're just reflective and thinking back and there's all this confusion and all these questions, this is how the cycle continues. You go back. A lot of people end up going back, because you know which, and that's more comfortable than the unknown. And no harm, no foul. We go through it. That it's just a part of some of us, how we're wired. But yes, the actual long-term help, I don't see anything long-term for either side, for the offender or the recipient. It's just a short-term, this is what you got to do to get through this moment. But long-term, I don't see that. You have to see, you have to see that out yourself.
That's exactly what I was talking about, long-term. Long-term, yes. And of course, the main thing we want is to rescue and put whoever is in danger in a safe place. Yes, of course, that is the most important thing. But in order to stop it, there has to be, like you said, long-term help for both sides. And like I said, what's interesting is that some of the men that I've interviewed, they actually don't know they're doing something wrong, right? Because that's what they saw growing up, if you will, because we're all product of our environment. And so they think that it's normal until it's actually brought to their attention that both sides, right? Being victimized and being the abuser. It's interesting that in having conversations with many men and women, they don't even realize that it's not okay. I had this one young lady, she ended up murdering her husband. And she tried to get help so many times from her family. Her family would send her back to her husband. Because again, to them, it was normal. This was just something that was normal in the family. Sometimes it could be a little cultural, right? Culture sometimes plays a big part in this. They literally sent her home every single time she tried to escape.
Wow.
And her own family, they're like, oh, it's normal. So to them, all of this was normal. This is just what you go through as a married woman, if you will, right? In her case. She was told things like, well, what did you do to provoke it? Why did you make him mad? Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. At the end of the day, her only recourse out of desperation, unfortunately, was to save her own life. Because really nobody was trying. Police were called many times. And so she did what she had to do to save her own life. But it just goes to show that her own family, this was normal. Her own family kept sending her back. And you're like, what? When she told the story, we're like shocked. But it's actually not as uncommon as you think, because I've heard that repeatedly. And it's more like smaller town. It just depends, right? Like, I was shocked. I was shocked to hear all that myself, just like how yes.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that when you are in that extreme of a place of desperation to save your life, that your life is in that high of danger, and to hear that the cops were called several times, that she's going out and so I have to ask, what happened in court? Was she found guilty, or was it okay because she defended herself?
She was incarcerated. Obviously, she had to go to trial and everything, but she was found not guilty after a long process. And so she's free. She's with somebody who she has a healthy relationship, and she's doing well. Last I interacted with her, so she is doing well. But yeah, I was shocked when she was telling me all of these facts, because people are like, "Didn't you call the cops?" And it's an obvious. Yes, she's like many times, and there's records of that. There's records of all the time the police officer went to their home and did not remove her or him. And then And of course, there's that other side too, where we were talking about men being victimized in domestic violence. And on the other side of that spectrum is that the men go to jail, even though the other ones standing there bleeding. So there's just so much to be addressed with regards to domestic violence, right? So much. So many things that still need work, even though we're in 2023. And just so much awareness for families, because look, this is not normal. And here, the awareness for people to understand it's not okay to be hurt.
That's right. And I want to touch on a few things. Hello, this is 2023 going into 2024, and we are still fighting for rights and programs and protection under the umbrella of domestic violence. Over 382 years, we have been fighting for rights. The very first thing that was presented to in the body of Massachusetts was in 1641, that a woman should no longer receive the stripes and marks of her husband. 1641, over 382 years we have been fighting. Okay, enough is enough. And I want to touch base on what you were saying as it relates to your environment, your neighborhood, your culture. I was born and raised in the heart of Chicago. So as a female back in the 90s, you needed to protect yourself by any means. It didn't matter. Violence was on every corner. Violence was in the house, outside the house. You had to walk through metal detectors to get into school. There's violence in the school, outside the school, just waiting for you. It's every corner. So my first relationship, oh yeah, it was abusive. Oh yeah, you're not going to hit me and I'm not going to hit back. I was taught I better fight back. Yeah. Little did I know that was not normal. That was unhealthy. I understood it as this was life. This was all that I knew. And it wasn't until that my firstborn came into the world that I was like, oh, wait, hold on a second. I don't think this is right. And I made those choices to change my situation. But yes, I will have to sit here and admit that maybe I was not the aggressor, but I was surely a part of it.
You were reactive. We call that reactive. Because I may have,
and I may have, and I may have provoked and instigated some stuff too, because hey, I'm now at this point, it's been 2, 3, 4, 5 times that we've gotten into it. So now I'm ready. I'm already thinking, yep, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. You're already like thinking in your brain, what are your moves going to be? How are you going to hurt or harm this individual as soon as they raise their hand or come at you? And it becomes, there's something that you feel inside. This isn't right. This isn't healthy. This is not what I want.
It's interesting that you say that, because I come from the same background except from LA. So Compton, and then I lived in projects where we used to dive to the floor because drive-bys were common. You see, literally would get up in the morning and like, hey, you guys want to go see what new blood's on the floor? So when you are a product of your environment, you become desensitized to violence. And not only because you think it's normal, you're on survival mode, right? Because when you come from these types of background, culturally or socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods, you're just on survival mode. And so you become desensitized to violence, if you will, not in the sense that it's okay, but it's more, okay, this is what we're used to seeing, even in your households. I didn't know it was not normal till I went to a friend's house. I used to get bused to a more affluent area. And I went to my friend's house and I was like, wow, everybody's so respectful to each other. Everybody loves. It was different. Not that they didn't have their own issues, but it wasn't the extreme that my household was. But yeah, when you come from certain neighborhoods and backgrounds and culture, it becomes a norm, and you are more reactive because you're a survivor. Okay, you're like, okay, like you said, how. Because for me, it's interesting that you brought that up. I always say I'm never going to be a victim of domestic violence. Oh, no one's ever going to touch me. They're never going to do that to me. No, and I always made it quite clear that where I stood as far as this concerned, and what boundaries I had. I was at the boundaries. But it was interesting because I was in therapy one day, and the therapist handed me a domestic violence pamphlet, and I was like, what? So there's many faces of domestic violence, as you well know. And so I was like, wow, I'm being abused financially because I was newly married and I moved, left everything, all my security and my job and everything, and moved to a different part of the state, and I had no income. And so then I started developing symptoms of anxiety and what have you. So I'm like, okay, because I already know you got a nip it in the butt, I went to therapy because I love therapy and everybody should get it.
Thank you. Yes, say that again. Say that louder.
There's no shame. Go. I used to have a shirt with a Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, and it said, "I have issues." And I would wear it to therapy, and my therapist thought it was like so hilarious. Yeah, so it's not normal to feel anxiety or panic attacks. That is not your normal state of being. I started feeling all these physical symptoms of that, and so I went to therapy, and sure enough, he handed me this pamphlet. And I was like, wow. And it was just an aha moment for me, not only to understand all these different faces of domestic violence, but also it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter even what knowledge you have of this, and even your social status. Because when I was working with the Domestic Violence Foundation, I met attorneys who were victims of domestic violence. Attorneys, they know the law. She was very wealthy, yet the shame behind it. And that's one of the things that I love to do is heal shame, make it okay. And so just the shame behind it. And also we were holding a fundraiser for another domestic violence foundation. And one of the founders came up to me. I was promoting, in the foundation, I was promoting a book that I have. And she came to me and she's, she goes, I feel so ashamed because here I am talking about domestic violence, but I'm also suffering too. I'm going through it. And she's like, how can I have the nerve to sit here and run a foundation and come here and talk to these women? And one of my things was like, speak your truth. Just speak your truth. There's no shame behind it. If anything, it's going to help raise more awareness that it doesn't have a social status. It doesn't have any limit as far as who falls under that umbrella or that title. Because a lot of times we think it's just women who are low socioeconomic statuses or uneducated, if you will, when in fact it's affecting people who are very well educated, people who are financially wealthy. And so it was interesting to go and really discover all these different faces or types of situations you can be in. For me, because it was financial, what it looked like was that he would always threaten to leave and leave me with nothing. And so that was very stressful when I have no other income to fall back on. And I have my children that I relocated, and because you make decisions and you're like, man, so a little bit of guilt and shame falls in that. Wow, I make these decisions. I'm a bad judge of character. But what you do in those situations is you get out as soon as possible, if you can, right? And yeah, I was really shocked because I swore to God up and down that I would never be a victim of domestic violence. Yet somehow it still touched me. And so that raising awareness of that as well, like, I have to touch on this because I was talking about, and you can jump in because you facilitate it, girl, because I will keep on talking. This is something. This is, I have so many stories and touching on shame. One of the things that I like to address, I'm an education specialist, and so it starts very young sometimes. I see so many, teaching in high school, there are so many young couples who are already experiencing that. And really just an understanding, like I said, the shame behind it and talking. Shame killed my mom. The shame kills. because you're too embarrassed to talk about it. And because my mom's shame was so big, she ended up losing her life because of it. Because in fact, she could have reached out to family members, her male siblings would have been more than happy to whoop my dad's ass. To be very blunt, they would have been more than happy if they would have known. Oh my God, my dad probably wouldn't have gone to the length that he went to, because he would have known that he couldn't do it because there was somebody there to protect my mom.
Can we talk about that a little bit? You said your dad was a 3 times murderer and your
Yes,
mom was a part of one of them.
she was.
Was she the first, the second, the third, and how in the
She was the
world
last.
she
Yeah,
was
she
the
was
last?
the last that we know of, because after that we no longer knew anything of my father.
Did anybody know that he was a violent man prior to them getting together? Did she know that this was his history, his
No,
past?
no, the other two were committed during the marriage as well. And in a book that I wrote is You're Not Alone, Loving Yourself Through Pain and Suffering, I describe the entire situation, literally take you through it. You will experience what I experienced. And no, so my mother was the last. There was two others during the marriage. So my mother was 14 years old when she was in a relationship with my father. And actually, this is in Mexico in the old days, where if you get the daughter pregnant, you will answer and you will marry her. And so my grandmother went looking for, because my father left, and my grandmother went looking for my father in another part of Mexico, brought him back, because you can't dishonor the child or the woman if you marry them. This whole cultural thing. And again, this was obviously in what, the 70s, 60s, 69, because I was born in 70. She was 14 and had me at 15. And my dad was 5 years older than her. And no, actually, and my father probably had some narcissistic tendencies and had some mental health issues that he probably needed to address as well, because he himself lived a very traumatic childhood. And that's why sometimes I say, if your understanding of what other people have gone through, then you, okay, I can see it. But again, you have the responsibility to take accountability for that and seek growth, if you will, right? Seek personal growth. So no, my mother was the last one, and he always threatened her. He want to trigger your audience, but he would hold warning. You may be triggered with this story, so if you cannot handle it, please log off. It's graphic. So he literally would hold knives to her and hold her over cliffs and threaten to push her off with knives to her neck. Often would pull knives out. And that's actually what he used to murder her as well. So that was his choice, his weapon of choice, if you will. So there was a lot of times, but interestingly enough, when my dad used to threaten my mom and tell her, I'm gonna beat you. He used to tell her, and just regurgitating, is in Spanish, I'm gonna beat your ass. My mom would be like, one of the mistakes my dad made was he taught my mom how to box. Made her. All of us had no choice. We all had to learn how to box from a young age. He's, put the boxing gloves on, and no, I don't want to. Well, okay, I have no choice. You have to learn how to box. So we all learned how to box, my mom included. He used to tell her that, and my mom was like, oh no, we're gonna beat each other's ass, which is a whole nother story. And the whole back and forth thing, because now she's okay, I know how to box. But he would always grab other weapons, obviously, to threaten her and take her down and what have you. And that was the weapon of choice as well for when he finally ended her life. And I was 19 years old. And so now I was left with 4 siblings, ranging from 1-year-old, 3, Vanessa, 12 or 13, and then my brother was 17 and I was 19. And so then now I was in charge of raising my siblings at 19. Yes.
So for your entire life, you saw your parents in this abusive relationship. It sounds like you have vivid memories of what you said earlier, knife pulled out on throat and threatened to be pushed over cliffs. You were present during a lot of this.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. So as a child, like we were talking earlier, as a child who grew up in this environment, there's so many things that affect you and why these children need obviously to have counseling. And thank God that I've had angels along the way, and a high school teacher who said, hey, go get therapy. So I went to get therapy along the way. And then, you know, personal growth, all emotional intelligence and all these things. Thank God's given me the courage and the ability to understand that I needed growth. And sometimes you still get aha moments. Not too long ago, I was talking to my husband because I've always had trouble sleeping. And my husband just freaking faints. He just goes to sleep. He doesn't sleep, he faints. So,
There must be a good peace of mind right there that he could just do that.
oh, that's great. I've been asking him, hey, have you always been able to sleep like that since you were a child and a kid? He's, yeah, I've always been able to knock out. And something triggered, something just, it was an aha moment. Like when I asked, have you always been able to sleep since you were a child? And I was like, wow, I haven't been able to sleep since I was a child. And then I was like, and I know why, because I was always up making sure my mom was going to be okay. Like I would peek and I would make sure. And oftentimes because I was up, I would hear things that I shouldn't have been hearing as well. Unfortunately, I got to see my mom be raped by my father, because guess what? Your husbands can rape you. And wow, I haven't slept since I was a child, because I was always awake, making sure that I was going to be able to protect my mom. When in fact, I really wasn't. I just would get beat too.
Yeah.
And in that moment, because there's obviously all kinds of therapies to heal your inner child and to forgive and let go and grow. In that moment, as soon as I said that, I was like, wow, okay. I didn't feel safe enough to sleep. Immediately, I just started affirming to myself. And I said, you know what, little Maria, it's okay for you to sleep. You are safe. You're safe. And wow, it was interesting. I was like, so you still have aha moments, and you have to really acknowledge those. And guess what? I've been sleeping better ever since. But I had to release it and tell little Maria. My therapist one time was like, you got to take care of little Maria. the child that was wounded, right? And there's a joke. My daughter joked about that one time, because I would tell them, I would share my therapies with my children, and she joked about that. And I told her that therapist was like, and at first you feel silly, right? And I'm just talking about this for you ladies who don't think it's okay. It is okay. Therapist was like, you got to take care of little Maria. And I was like, okay, because you feel silly, right? She take care of her, nourish her, yada yada. I left the therapist office and I sat down in my car and I just thought I'd have fun with it. And I was like, little Maria, I go, girl, we're gonna go shopping. I go, buckle up. I put her seatbelt on. I was like, we're going to your favorite store and we're gonna just do what you love. You love to shop and have fun. I go, and then we're going to the beach because you love the beach. And I would just play with it. And it was just fun. It was silly, it was fun, and it took away the whole, oh, now this is so dumb, right? Or I'm not crazy, whatever. So I just made it fun. And I told my daughters at that time, was my two daughters were home. And you have to make it okay. So that way your kids, in case they need therapy, you messed your kids up too.
It's definitely generational.
So that it's okay for them to go to therapy too. So I would share my therapy experience with them. And I told them about little Maria. And one day my daughter, out of the blue, this was probably like a month later, and she just yells, Mom. And I'm like, she startled me. I'm like, what? And she's like, Little Maria's bothering me.
Ah!
She's Little Maria's on the couch and she's bothering me. And we started cracking up. I'm like, you were so wrong.
You're right.
It just goes to show that we have to have fun. We have to have fun. It's okay. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah,
It's okay
yeah,
to
it
not be
is.
okay.
And I love
Yeah.
what you said about healing that inner child, because we cannot control the childhood that we were born into. But once we become adults and we continue raising ourselves, we do have the capability to go back and heal that child. Just
Yeah.
squatting down and looking at that child eye to eye, obviously in your imagination, and really nurturing and providing that security. Because it sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like your childhood, you were afraid and you were seeking to be a protector, almost like you'd rather endure and protect than to see or hear your own mom going through it.
Yes.
And that's so much to take on as a child. And that trauma is so unfortunate of what you went through. And then it almost sounds, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just here on the listening end, but when that happened, when that tragic moment took place and you got word that she had been murdered by your father, and you said you were already out of the house and you took your 4 siblings in. So really, what did you even have the time to process and to mourn and to grieve and to really wrap your head around everything that happened? Or were you just in like survival go mode? You just had to figure stuff out to take care of these children and change your entire life.
Yeah, initially I didn't have time to mourn. There was no time for that. It was just all very quick. And no, you're right. And so it catches up with you. And you mentioned being in survival mode. I actually had to learn to release that survivor mode because it's been ingrained from having to dive on the floor and not get shot to protecting my mom and even myself being physically abused. My father used to whoop me with wet extension cords and beat me so bad that like I couldn't move, and all I could do was drag myself into the closet and ask God to please make it stop. Like, when does it end? Is this what I was born for? So they were very brutal beatings for me. But I always said, and I remember the teacher that I was talking about earlier that made me promise that I'd go to therapy. She had to have courage because one day I showed up to school in sweats and I always wore shorts and the little telltale signs, right? And so I ended up coming in shorts because I had welts all over my legs. And she just found it interesting. And so she followed me to the dressing room. And she was like, what's going on? You never wear sweats. And really she goes, you don't even wear sweats when it's cold. So why are you wearing sweats? And I was like, oh, nothing. I just felt like it. I didn't have any clean shorts, whatever. You come up with all these excuses. And I remember that she was like, put your pants down. I said, no. And I started getting defensive and of course reacted and stuff. But she was a teacher that I was close to, by the way. So we had rapport. She was telling me to put my pants down. And, yeah, we had rapport. And so she was, no, put your pants down. I'm like, there's something not right. And I said, no. I go, stop being a sicko. Like, why didn't you pull my pants down? There was no, something's not right. She just had this feeling. So she actually ended up pulling my pants down, like my sweats, but I had shorts under, but still, and we were in the girls' locker room. And then she saw my legs and she was like, oh my God. And she freaked out. She started cussing. Who did this? And she was just like, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. So then I have to call the cops. I have to report this. And so I begged her, I got on my knees. I'm like, please don't call anybody. If you take me out, my dad's gonna start beating my siblings. And they're not used to it. I am. So I'm like, if you take me out, they're gonna end up paying for that. So then, and I was just begging her, and she's just looking at me. She's crying because she doesn't know what to do now. And so then she said, get up off your knees. Don't ever get on your knees for no one and beg no one. And you do that to pray to God and that's it. But
That's
never,
right.
never to submit to begging or what have, because I was begging for my life and my siblings' lives, really.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
fear kicking in. That's obvious fear
Yeah.
kicking in. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so then she did the bravest thing ever as a mandated reporter. Like and because she, and even as an education specialist myself, when I've come across students who are little Marias of the world, it's rough, it's tough when you're like, which one is the worst evil? And she actually just made me promise that I was gonna go to therapy. Did you have to promise? So I did. And that's where my journey with that began. And so therapy's good, you guys. That like, it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. Go and get the help that you need. Go and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because a
Yeah.
lot of times we're not allowed to be vulnerable, right? Because we're in survival mode.
Yeah, and I'm a strong believer in that also. I'm a coach as well, and I believe that being safe and vulnerable at the same time is an option. It's finding the right place to do that where you can feel safe and vulnerable at the same time. And through therapy and or coaching, interview
Yeah.
that person and make sure that they're the right fit for you, because if you're not being coached or helped by somebody who has been there and that can relate, it might not be as smooth, or as you might not feel as safe, because when somebody can't understand you, it's just workbook style, it's a little rough. But when there is somebody that really can empathize, understand, feel the emotions, because they also have been in a similar situation, I feel that adds a lot of weight.
And I can also add to that, there are coaches, unfortunately, who have not done the work.
Oh, you cannot be a coach if you haven't done the work yourself. I agree. Yes.
Who have not done the work to be a coach. They may be one step ahead of you and that's it. And not only that, but they're not equipped or trained or have gained the knowledge to work with traumas. And sometimes end up doing more harm than good, because their emotional intelligence is not where it needs to be. Because sometimes they'll still give you advice based on their own beliefs, because remember, we're a product of our own environment. And so we have biases. And so unless you have been trained or have awareness, self-awareness of all these things, you're going to give advice based on the way you would react. And so there's a lot of questions that you should ask as far as, are they trauma informed? What kind of work have they done? Because they can only help you if they're giving from their full cup, and their cup isn't empty still too.
That's right. And that's not an easy thing to gauge. You usually find out halfway through it, which is another, and something that you said as it relates to like advice and opinions. My strong opinion towards that is any therapist or coach that you are seeking out or that you are working with, they should not be giving biased opinions at all. Because
And sometimes even therapists are not prepared to work with them. I have a couple of therapist friends, and they will admit that no, some therapists are not trained to deal with trauma, because remember, they read a book and they apply a book, and coaches too. Sometimes they just read a book, but what have you really done? If somebody can't take you through steps, and they haven't done the work, a lot of times, a lot of, at least therapists that I've met, have gone into therapy because they're seeking their own personal growth as well, which is commendable. But at the same time, they're not ready to deal with certain types of issues, if you will. They may be able to deal with one issue, but not something that has a lot of trauma behind it, because they'll use, all of us have trigger words. And like one of mine, because my dad used to always call me stupid. is stupid. Or something that, and you have to be aware of things like that to be able to have conversations with people, like with my husband, because I have put in the work and I have self-awareness. Like I can speak my needs to my husband and to anybody else. And so when he insinuates, or because we come from a hood place, right? We're both educated, but you have your hood influence. And like he'll be like, "Oh, dumbass," and that words. I go, "That's a trigger word for me." I said, "Can we not use that word? Otherwise, Compton Maria's gonna come out."
That's right.
So I'm like, that word doesn't feel good to me. And then in talking, like we've uncovered some of his trigger words. And so you have to understand all of this. You have to have training in emotional intelligence, in trauma, and you have to be very self-aware. If you ask me, oh man, I got you, and I'm going to tell you all of my things that I'm still growing in myself. Have I grown a lot? Oh my God, so much, so much. And I wouldn't change anything because, ladies, even if you're going through something, it may be a step up, because you may be called to help somebody else. And once you get where you need to be, you'll be able to save lives and change lives. And so it's all in perspective, right? It's how we look at things. And for me, thank you, God, because of what I've been through and been able to overcome and get knowledge on and get training on and develop personally. I'm able to help others now, and maybe even stop it before they get to a certain level where they don't need to experience even more trauma, that they could stop it now. With my students, like I'm trying to help them right now while they're 15, 16, 17, become aware of what areas they need growth in. And it's amazing. It's amazing to see the difference from one year to another. I feel very blessed to have gone through whatever I've been through, because it allowed me to grow as an individual, and because now I get to help others.
Okay, so I am just like, that's a mic drop right there, because that is the perfect definition of what I like to talk about. And I want to ask you, because you've gone through the journey. You are a professional
Still,
as
we're going because we never stop.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you talk about emotional intelligence and you're giving back, and you are an education specialist. Have you personally heard of
PTG? No, I'm not familiar with the acronym.
Okay, have you heard of PTSD?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. I love your reaction, because this is what I really like to hone in on. Everybody that I have come across knows what PTSD is, right? I don't appreciate that it's considered disorder, like the D at the end. I don't think that it's a disorder. I think it's very normal. PTG is a real thing, and PTG means post-traumatic growth.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Post-traumatic growth. And what you just explained is exactly the definition of post-traumatic growth. You went through severe trauma. It doesn't have to be severe, but you personally went through severe trauma. It devastated your life. It interrupted your childhood. It re-interrupted your adulthood once you left the home. And look at where you are today. You're wiser, you're stronger, you have emotional intelligence, and you're doing something with it. You're helping that community. So this is the epitome of post-traumatic growth, where you took so much of what you experienced that was traumatic, negative, devastating, life-changing, and you are making it a positive, and you're giving that back.
Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to touch base on a couple other things that you had said, where you're talking about the triggers and the emotional intelligence. I also like to talk about that too, because triggers live inside of you. For example, there's positive and negative, right? If you think about your favorite song, you're already dancing. You're like, yeah, that's a positive trigger. But when you hear that word that you said, Compton Maria is going to come out, I say the same thing. Hey, Chi-Town's about to come out. because you recognize that you're being triggered and you're able to intercept an automatic reaction and have a freaking like respectable response. Okay. And you're letting that person know, yo, hold on, because you're about to trigger me and I'm going to let you have another opportunity to fix that so you can get the authentic.
Do you want a nice wife or a mean
Right.
wife?
Exactly. You know, and those are boundaries.
Yeah. And remember, you teach people how to treat you.
That's right. That's right. Because you cannot demand respect if you don't respect yourself and you don't show how you respect others. You cannot ask for anything. You can, but it's not going to be a great outcome if you're asking for something that you're not giving. Which is the same thing in leadership and or counseling. You can't help or lead if you haven't followed first or taken the action first or done the work yourself first. Absolutely, 100%. And like you said, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say with these teenagers, yeah, it's very important. I believe, my personal opinion is to show them or to ask them, to guide them, help them understand what their morals and their ethics are personally, because and as teenagers, they're rebellious against parents. Their brain is completely separated again, as in toddler form. And it's reteaching them, but in a different, more mature capacity, because they're seeking outward community enrichment. They're trying to rebel from what's at home. So yeah, getting into their headspace, and especially under the umbrella of domestic violence, there is so much teen dating violence out there because they have frustrations bottled up and from home, and they don't know how to express their emotions, or because that's what they're seeing at home, and so they're just repeating the behaviors. There's so many things around that, and I strongly believe that our youth and schools should have a curriculum specifically for domestic violence. Why is it that kids need to wait until they go to college to be protected under the Violence Against Women's Act? Like you said, it happens to all genders. There's no discrimination. Title, finances, culture, there's no discrimination. Domestic violence happens regardless of who you are, how much money you make. It's what you decide to do about it as it relates to yourself, your future, your kids. And it's just, again, tying it back to high school. I believe that this should be taught in high school.
So I had a young couple, and it was interesting. So every time they fought, they got kicked out of school. They got suspended or sent home, whatever. But no one would address the issue. And I was like, you know what? So tired of seeing them getting kicked out. There was this one instance where their teacher happened to be out of the classroom, and I was just, because she had to go to the restroom. It's a real thing, man. The struggle's real for teachers, and I'm going to the restroom. So I was in there watching the class, and sure enough, this young couple started going at it. And so I finally, as soon as she came back, I took them to a separate room. And I said, what happened? I asked them, why is it that we're having this conflict? They always had it. And there's a saying that behavior doesn't equal emotion, right? So the young man was very reactive to his girlfriend not letting him use the phone or something like that. It had to do with the phone. And so I'm like, what happened? She says, when people see it, they just, oh, he's trying to do this. And they're like, and she's reacting. So we went in, we sat down, and we went deeper. I asked him, she's like trying to hide the phone, so instead of painting the whole, because it's a long story, at the end of the day, what we came to a conclusion was that the reason he was reacting to her was because from a maternal standpoint, he's always been denied control. And when we started to unpack both of their issues, which has to do with emotional intelligence and why we react the way we react, why we laugh when someone falls or react to conflict the way we do, is all a part of emotional intelligence and being a product of our environments. Long story short is that he felt his mom would always reject and deny him. And her actions were triggering him. And that's the kind of what I was talking about with the whole treating the abuser, if you will. It's to long-term though, like you said, because obviously this is not going to be fixed overnight, is that unpacking the triggers, right? Because she unintentionally triggered him. He was reactive to her. And then we also unpacked her as far as why she did that. And she was very honest. And I'm like, hey, can we actually be very honest and very transparent? And it stays here and you will not judge each other and so forth. As it turns out, she was being manipulative. She was purposely triggering him. And so we just unpacked. It took about an hour and a half, and we unpacked everything. We unpacked her triggers, his triggers, why they were triggered. And they never fought again because they understood each other and they understood each other's story.
Look at that.
2 hours in high school. How come we can't do that?
That's right.
They're suspending them, which takes them away from the academics. Now they're falling behind.
Yep.
You know, when it took 2 hours for this young couple to understand why they were acting the way they were acting and understand each other's triggers. And they gave me some homework about respect and other things, but after that, and they ended up breaking up probably a year later, but respectfully.
And that's a great story just for as an opener to why this is so important, because here again, back to those teenagers not being able to understand or be able to even articulate their emotions, not having the capacity to have the emotional intelligence to talk about it and unpack it. That's why we're talking about a serious gap here that needs to be filled, because I think if this is taught in high school before they become adults into the world, at least they're getting something somewhere that's solid. And on top of that, understanding where to research and navigate for resources should they find themselves in a situation where they need to or want to further educate themselves or get help. And I just want to say for our listeners, no matter what age you are, any partner that comes across possessive, controlling, jealous, where they want everything that's happening to be done with you alone, asking for accountability as where you've been, what time you were there, checking in, calling several times, not wanting you to go to even work or be around other people, family, friends, helping you like basically get so disconnected and isolated that they have you all for themselves. That happens more so in the teenage years, but that also happens in adulthood.
Have sex with me to show me that you love me.
Yeah. Red flags. You really took us through a journey and a half. And what I appreciate, Maria, is that you chose, this is an open forum, and you chose to talk about how you navigated, what you have done to work on yourself, how you've healed yourself, how you've sought help to get healed, and how you are giving back. And again, that just goes to the definition of post-traumatic growth. But your choice to talk about that opposed to the turmoil, the coping, the emotions, the struggles, you pulled your boots up and you put your hat on and you put your best face on and you showed up the way you felt you needed to show up, regardless of suppressing your grieving, regardless of suppressing your own emotions and working through that. And you were very clear on how that caught up to you later and that you still needed to do the work. So for our listeners, postponing your healthy mindset, postponing your emotional intelligence, postponing your healing process is basically not the best choice to make for yourself, because the more you sweep it under the rug, the larger that pile becomes, and pretty soon you're going to start tripping over it. So the sooner that you seek counseling, therapy, help, the better you become as a person, the quicker you are preventing generational repeatable behaviors if your children are there watching you, if you're influencing other people in your life. And Maria, I'm going to ask, based on so much that you have gone through and that you're doing and you're still actively doing in the community and with our youngins, what would be your wounds to wisdom statement for our listeners?
I wasn't prepared for that question, so let me think about it. I think, you know, to love yourself.
To love yourself.
And it's okay to love yourself. Doesn't matter what stage of love you're at. You could maybe not stand and look at yourself in the mirror yet. Maybe, but there's something about yourself that you love. Something. I don't care if it's one hair on your head, your fingernails, the way you cook grilled cheese. Something. Love it. Start there. Start at a point because that's the ultimate goal, is to be in a state of self-love. And really, you can't love anybody else until you really love yourself. And so you're going to continue to attract these type of men or women because they're a reflection of the love that you have for yourself. And so when you start loving yourself and respecting yourself and understand that you are so valuable, then you're not going to settle. And the first red flag that you see, you're going to nip it in the buttons. You're not even good. It's not even going to show up because it's not something that's available in your experience anymore. That's in the past, and the past is gone. But if you start with just one micro step of self-love, all it can do is add up and increase till the day that you're standing tall with the Wonder Woman pose, and you're like, I'm deserving of all the great things in life. And that's all I'm going to settle for, is the great things in life, great people in my experience. Only people who are in a love space. That's what we call it, a love space in my relationship. If we are not going to be respectful to each other, like you said, it's all part of emotional intelligence, and you know what your triggers are. We say, babe, I'm not in my love space. And sometimes you can ask for help and say to your partner when you get there is, can you help me? I'm not in my love space. Can you help me get there? But self-love, like I said, a fingernail, toenail, there's something about a skill you have. Like I said, if you cook the best macaroni and cheese or grilled cheese, or there's something that you have, a skill, something on your body, something that you love. Start there. I used to do an exercise where I would have women tell themselves they love them, and sometimes they couldn't, they start crying. They couldn't see themselves in the mirror. But there will come a time where you can look in the mirror and you will do how I do. I throw myself kisses. Even when I wake up in the morning with my bed head and all crusty, I'm just like, girl, I love you. And I'm like, mwah. And you will get there. You will get there. You will get there. I believe that you all have the strength and the courage to get there. You all really do. You're stronger than you really think. And just think about a time when you thought for sure, you're like, oh man, I can't get through this. But you're still here. You're still standing. You're still standing. And for that, congratulations. I'm so proud of you because you're still standing. And possibilities are all there. You get to have a good life. You get to have a good life. You get to have a good life.
Tell us again, you told us earlier, and I'm going to have the link when this airs. Please tell us the name of your book again, where people can find you.
So that book is actually more of my story, right? And It's called You Are Not Alone, Loving Yourself Through Pain and Suffering. It's available on Amazon. In December, I'm going to be launching a new book. And this book's actually going to teach you how to have self-awareness and how to really let go of the pain. And that book, I don't have a visual because this was impromptu interview.
Yes, it was.
So if I can describe the background, so the title, it's faded, and it's going to have You're Not Enough, Your Mistake, fatty, ugly, all this faded in the background. And in red, it's gonna say, shut up, liar. No, I'm not. Permission to take off the mask and be your authentic self. And so in that book that will be coming out in December, hopefully, that I'm gonna take you through the growth that I've had and describe how you can get there too, how some of the techniques that you can apply to be able to be your authentic self, to heal the shame, if you will, and to be okay about speaking about it. You should be able to speak about your so-called shame like you speak about your new shoes.
That's right. I love it. Wow. You are an inspiration, amazing woman, post-traumatic growth, perfect example of it. This has been such an honor to have you here. And I know we are going to stay in touch. We are on a very similar mission. And I think that we have some things to do together here. So we'll continue talking backstage. And I just want to thank you so much for your time and for being so open and sharing everything that you did and articulating it in such a way that is giving hope and inspiration to our listeners. And I want to touch on two things here. You talked about looking in the mirror. 100%. I believe in mirror neurons. And when you are in a situation or have moved out and you're moving on and it's still hard to look in that mirror and you're confused about who you are, that's normal and that's okay. Yes. I know that you know who you're not if you're not sure on who you are. And when you know either one, who you are or who you're not, that's where your boundaries start and they can evolve with you. But you just stay your course and do what you believe is the best option or the right option for you. I say there's two choices to make: the best choice or the right choice. One may not always back up the other, but it's still a choice because doing nothing changes nothing. Exactly. So with that being said, I'm going to close us out. I just want to say that as adults, what we show our children and in our home is what influences and molds their future. And when children are not safe at home, they're not learning at school. They're masking their feelings and they're hiding. So a part of what we do as this nonprofit Confronting Domestic Violence, we help families relocate when they have a safe place to go, but not the means to get there. We don't provide housing, but we get you to housing. So this way, no matter how old your child is, there's no rejection there. And we're all about filling gaps. So thank you for listening. Maria, thank you for being here. And we'll take our future and our work offline, and they'll see us again another time.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Confronting Domestic Violence is a 501c3. All contributions, volunteers, and sponsorships are welcomed. It takes a community to make a difference. Nobody should suffer alone. Please scan the QR code.